Most OG Bitcoiners still hold onto one belief so tightly that it has practically become a religion. Bitcoin is money. Only money, pure censorship-resistant digital money, nothing more, nothing less. And for many years, that was the entire foundation on which the Bitcoin movement stood. The early white paper, the first forums, the original mailing list conversations, and the thousands of chaotic arguments that erupted online all repeated the same thing. Bitcoin wasn't meant to host apps, or to store images, or to embed videos, or to function as a global data warehouse.
It was meant to be the ultimate form of digital cash, something that governments couldn't freeze, banks couldn't interfere with, and no single entity could manipulate.
This ideology became sacred to the earliest adopters, the ones who bought or mined Bitcoin back when nobody cared, when it was practically worthless, when the world thought it was just internet magic created by an anonymous ghost to them. Bitcoin equals money. That's the definition they protect like guardians at the gates. But somewhere along the way, as Bitcoin grew, as corporations started paying attention, as political interests circled around it like vultures, and as billionaires began to realize the power this technology could hold, the direction of Bitcoin quietly started shifting, and a lot of people didn't notice it happening. The roads didn't close. There were no big announcements, no fireworks. Instead, it happened silently, in the lines of code written by the core development team. A team that, depending on who you ask, has received funding from some unusually powerful and potentially questionable sources. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a documented reality that many people inside the crypto world whisper about, but very few talk about openly.
Because when the money is big, the influence is bigger, and the narratives that get pushed become extremely strategic.
One of the biggest changes, the one that very few normal Bitcoin users even understand, was something that revolved around a tiny part of Bitcoin's code called OP return. Now at first glance, OP return doesn't look like anything special. It doesn't look like a revolution.
It doesn't even look like something that would matter to most people. But OP return is the feature that lets you attach a small amount of data to a Bitcoin transaction. It was originally designed to allow simple metadata, like a little text, a signature, a reference, a pointer to something external. And for years, this feature existed, but it was intentionally restricted. The limit wasn't just a technical choice, it was a philosophical one.
Bitcoin was designed to be money, and anything that could clog the blockchain with unnecessary weight was considered a threat.
An overloaded blockchain becomes slow, expensive, and inefficient. And the early Bitcoin visionaries believed that turning Bitcoin into a storage system for random data would destroy its purpose entirely. But the new version of Bitcoin, the one governed by the modern core developers, made a very subtle but extremely impactful update. They increased the size of OP return data. They expanded what could be inserted into a Bitcoin transaction. And the moment that limit was increased, everything changed, because now, instead of Bitcoin being just a monetary transaction system, it became capable of storing all sorts of data. Pictures, videos, documents, entire digital objects. The blockchain became capable of holding things that were never intended to be stored inside it. This is the moment when Bitcoin stopped being just money and quietly transformed into something far bigger, whether people wanted it or not.
The reason this matters is because Bitcoin's blockchain is immutable. Once data is written, it can never be erased, never edited, never removed, and never censored.
That immutability is what makes Bitcoin valuable as money. It means nobody can rewrite your balance. Nobody can delete your transaction history. Nobody can pretend your coins don't exist. That immutability is powerful, but when you apply it to data, not just money, you create a whole new kind of tool. A tool that can store anything forever, locked into a chain that spans the entire world, duplicated across thousands of computers, impossible to erase.
And once you accept that, you realize the implications. A blockchain like that isn't just digital cash anymore.
It becomes a permanent global library, a file storage system, a digital time capsule, a record-keeping device that can be used for purposes far beyond simple financial transactions.
And suddenly, the new narrative began to form. Not officially, not loudly, not with press releases.
But quietly, inside developer discussions and crypto conferences and community debates, the new vision said that Bitcoin isn't just money.
Bitcoin is data. Bitcoin is a protocol for storing information.
Bitcoin is a digital foundation on which people can build applications, NFTs, images, inscription systems, and information systems that live forever.
This wasn't a theoretical idea anymore. With the expanded OP return, this became reality. Now, imagine how the original Bitcoin supporters reacted.
The early miners, the libertarians, the cryptographers, the cypherpunks, the privacy activists, the people who believed Bitcoin was supposed to be the alternative to government, controlled money.
The people who thought Bitcoin was never supposed to store anything except financial transactions. For them, this change felt like betrayal. It felt like the original mission was being altered by people who didn't understand or didn't care about Bitcoin's initial purpose. Many of them argued that storing data, especially media files, inside the blockchain would not only waste space, but also increase transaction fees, slow down the network, and push Bitcoin away from being usable everyday currency. Their argument was simple. If Bitcoin becomes a storage device, it stops being practical money.
And that would destroy the thing that made Bitcoin revolutionary in the first place. On the other hand, supporters of the update argued that the world had changed.
Technology had evolved. People wanted more from Bitcoin than just money. They wanted a digital foundation that could host new forms of creativity, new markets, new forms of digital ownership.
They believed that expanding OP return was a natural step in Bitcoin's evolution, something that would make it more useful, not less.
To them, Bitcoin's immutability wasn't just useful for money. It was useful for all human information.
And they painted a future where Bitcoin becomes the ultimate ledger of humanity.
A place where art, identity, contracts, legal documents, and historical data could live forever unaltered, incorruptible.
This created a massive ideological conflict inside the Bitcoin community, and whether people saw it or not, a power struggle began.
Because once you change what Bitcoin is capable of, you change what Bitcoin is. And once you change what Bitcoin is, you change who controls it, who influences it, who benefits from it, and who uses it.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. Because the core development team, the people who maintain and update Bitcoin's code, are not elected.
They are not voted into position by Bitcoin holders. They do not answer to the community the way a government has to answer to its citizens. They are simply the people who have access to the codebase and the trust of a certain part of the ecosystem.
And over time, many of these developers began receiving funding from corporations, institutions, and groups that had very different motivations from the original Bitcoin community. Some of those funders have been accused of wanting more influence over Bitcoin's direction. Some have been connected to organizations that historically tried to regulate or reshape the crypto landscape.
It's not proven that there was corruption, but many OG Bitcoiners argue that when money gets involved, especially big money, ideology becomes secondary.
This brings us back to OP return, because increasing the data capacity wasn't just a technical decision.
It was a philosophical decision made by a group of developers who believed Bitcoin should evolve into something else.
Something more than money, something that could host an entire layer of data-based applications. Something that could turn Bitcoin into a universal protocol, similar to how the internet backbone works.
This is why you now see NFT and inscriptions and digital collectibles stored on Bitcoin. This is why some people are putting entire image files into Bitcoin blocks.
This is why you see people saying Bitcoin isn't just money, it's a permanent global memory system. And whether you agree with it or not, this shift has already changed the reality of Bitcoin.
Because now the blockchain contains far more than transactions. It contains art. It contains jokes.
It contains experiments. It contains random files that people uploaded just because they could. It contains digital artifacts that will never be removed.
And once they are in forever. For the original Bitcoin believers, this is the nightmare scenario. Bitcoin turning into a cluttered storage chain full of meaningless junk that eats up block space and destroys Bitcoin's ability
To be used as everyday currency. They argue that high fees already make Bitcoin difficult for normal people to use, and data storage will only make it worse.
They fear Bitcoin is being hijacked. They fear the mission is being diluted. They fear this isn't innovation, it's distortion.
But for the supporters of the new direction, this is the dream. They see Bitcoin becoming something much bigger than money.
Something historical, something foundational, something that could redefine digital ownership and storage.
To them, OP return expansion was just the first step in unlocking a new generation of Bitcoin use cases.
They claim that Bitcoin's security and immutability make it the perfect home for permanent data storage.
And they argue that if Bitcoin doesn't evolve, it will be left behind by more flexible blockchains.
And here's the thing, neither side is completely wrong. Bitcoin was originally designed to be money. But technology evolves, people evolve, use cases evolve, the demand for digital permanence is real. And Bitcoin's blockchain is arguably the most secure permanent ledger humanity has ever created. So now we're living in a split reality. One Bitcoin is the old vision, digital cash, limited block space, efficient transactions, minimal interference. The other Bitcoin is the new vision, a permanent, unstoppable data storage protocol where people can embed entire digital assets.
And the tension between these two visions isn't going away. It's growing. Every new inscription, every new data, heavy block. Every fee hike, every debate, every update, they all build toward a future where Bitcoin either becomes the global data backbone or collapses under its own weight.
Or maybe, just maybe, it becomes something in between. But the truth is simple. The moment OP return expanded, Bitcoin changed forever. Whether that change is good or bad depends entirely on which version of Bitcoin you believe in. But no matter where you stand, one thing is undeniable: Bitcoin is no longer just money. It has quietly become a permanent, immutable data transfer protocol, and the world is only beginning to understand what that really means.